Now here's a really cool addition to our Wordle project. Look at the way this project is set up. There is the space for me to enter my letters as usual, but there's also this array of letters on the right side. Now when I start playing this game, for example, I try party, I get my regular indications. A is in the right place, T is in the wrong place, but I also get these indications in this grid here telling me that I have used these letters. Let's say I try music. Well, only U was there, but basically IMUSIC I've tried, and that is available over here. Now this is quite helpful when we're playing the game because we don't have to recall whether we have used a certain letter or not, and hence we can make informed choices because the number of choices is limited in this, right? Let's say we tried horn as usual. Well, turned out none of them were there. Never mind, but at least I see over here. So when I'm making a next guess, I can see, okay, well, I have not used B, I have not used F, say F, G, and so on and so forth. So, it could make my game, let's say, my choices more informed and the game more interesting. Now, we are enhancing the Wordle project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. In this video, we will see how we will take our game from the present state to this particular feature, where we display the letters that have been used. But this is going to be a long journey, and hence we'll have to do this in a step-by-step manner. At a high level, there are three important tasks to be done over here. First of all, we got to place those letters on the GUI, and this will bring us face to face with the new concept of Tkinter, which is called frames. So we will use frames to place those letters. In fact, frames is a very powerful idea in Tkinter. Basically, frames allow us to create, let's say, logical segregations in our GUI. We'll see this in a moment. Next, we'll have to keep track of all the letters that have been guessed. This is not very hard, in fact, because remember, we are checking for every word letter by letter. So all I need to do is to keep a list and keep track of which letters have been guessed previously. And once having done that, we must change the color of the guest letters. So I change the foreground color as well as the background color just to indicate that they have been used. And this can again be done using the information from here. Let's say in a list, we create a function to do this. So, lots of steps. We'll have to do this in a step-by-step manner. Otherwise, we'll end up in, let's say, some kind of confusion. Let's first understand the whole notion of frames. Well, the idea is that I'm going to create frames. Like I said, frames allow us to segregate, logical parts of the GUI into different portions. In this case, I'm going to create two frames. So first frame will be my game frame as usual. And then next I'll have, this, let's say, letters frame where I'll place these letters. Now, a few things to understand about frames. Like I said, they allow us to segregate into logical units. We can have multiple frames inside a window. The good thing is that each frame can have its own geometry manager. In fact, frames is one way where you can use pack and grid together. Like I said, we can use pack for one frame, grid for another frame. But in this case, we will use grid for this as well as this. The reason is very simple. In both these frames, the widgets are very, very, let's say, well organized, neatly organized. Just that the grid that is running for the game frame will be completely independent of the grid that we run for the letters frame. And that's the beauty of frames. The two can be completely independent, and that keeps it quite flexible and quite versatile. Now, keep in mind that frame itself is a widget, which means that when we place the frame on the window, we can use grid or pack again. I will use, or rather, in this case, we will use the grid placement again because think about it. We have a game frame, we have a letters frame. This is like two columns. So I'm going to just use a grid here, let's say row 0, column 0, and column 1. So that's going to be the method, right? Now, in order to accomplish all this, we will basically, like I said, we'll have a game frame and a letters frame. The first thing that I'm going to do is to create a game frame and to move all my existing widgets to the game frame and make sure that the game is still working. And this is very important to incrementally build this. Otherwise, we may lose track of what's going on. So I get back here to my code. Remember, right now this code is exactly what we had started with. There's only one change that I have made, which is that when I create these labels, I'm setting the width to 2, and I'm doing this here as well. Remember, the labels have to be done in both places, and this basically makes sure that the width, the labels don't shrink or let's say expand when the letter width changes. So this is just kind of one change I made, but other than that, this is exactly the game that was that we are building. So when I run this code, it's like we had seen earlier. So let's say I do limit as my first word that I try. You notice because I fixed the width over here, this I does not shrink. Otherwise, you might see that it shrinks, right? Just to fix that, I have fixed the width over here. But there's no second frame over here. But like I said, the first thing that I'm going to do is to define a game frame and make sure that all my widgets that are presently on the board end up inside the game frame. So let's do that. Basically, once I define a window, remember window is the biggest container in all this. First the window, then the widgets, and fundamentally frame is also a widget, right? So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, look, before I define any of these widgets, I just go and say, well, let me say create uh, a game frame, right? So create a game frame. Now game frame is tk dot frame. Now all I need to do is to tell what is the parent for this frame. In this case, it is going to be the window. So I just say, I'm telling that, okay, look, create this frame inside the game here. And I'm going to remember, it's always a basic rule that first define the widget and then place it on the grid, place it on the window, that is. So I'm going to say game frame dot grid. And remember, this is going to be placed side by side. So I just go and say row equals to 0, column equals to 0 as well. And let's just do sticky equals to tk.nsew. So, this kind of sets up the game. Now, all of these widgets, I'm going to put them inside the game frame. And the way we do that is wherever I'm defining this widget. So for example, let's go one by one. I'm defining this TK entry box inside the, game frame. So I just go and say, well, put this inside the game. No, so let's be careful. Game, say, frame. Next, I have this guess button. Again, I just put game frame, comma, everything else remains the same. Next, I have this result table. I just go and make sure it's also in the game frame. Notice I just have to do it once when I first create the widget, right? So I just say, okay, look, please create this in the game frame. And having done that, this grid automatically assigns, this grid automatically takes care that this is being done inside a frame, right? Now we also create these label guesses, which are these guesses. So again, when I create them, I'm going to say, well, these should be in the game frame. And once I do that, the grid takes care of everything else. The other widgets that I create as part of this game are, of course, the labels as the game goes on. So I just go and say again game frame, right? And I think this should really be it. Let me just make sure everything is all right. Okay, so when I run this, I get an error. The game frame is not defined. In fact, that's a silly mistake that I've made. I just have to make sure that the game frame gets defined before this nested for loop runs. So it's a create placeholders for the labels, right? So before that, I must define the game frame. And notice when I run this, in fact, the GUI looks exactly the same. So I can just try to say, well, let's try to do try party. Okay, very nice. I try limit, just trying something. Okay, none of that worked. So let's say music and so on. So my point is the game is working exactly same. Unfortunately, I'm guessing really badly, right? But you notice that all of these widgets are now functional. Now it's time for me to create the letters frame. So I will do that. Like I said, let me just close this for now. I'm going to say, well, let's create one more frame over here. So that is the letters frame. And again, I just go and say tk dot say frame, tk dot frame. Again, this must be on the window, and the letters frame dot grid. We will place this in row equals to 0, column equals to 1, because remember I wanted to place them side by side. And once again, I will just go and say sticky is equal to tk dot nsew. And I want to give some little bit of space here, so I just put say pad x is equal to perhaps maybe 30. Now in order for me to be able to clearly see this, I'm going to create, let's say, a border width over here of say 1. Use the relief called ridge. Now again, this is just a choice, right? So Now, I have got here some simple code which can place these letters over there. The way I'm doing this is very straightforward. In fact, I've defined a string which has all the letters from A until Z. And thereafter, I'm just running through these letters. I want to find out for every letter which row, which column it goes in. And for that purpose, I use this div mod function. Remember, div mod gives me not just the quotient but also the remainder. So basically, I'm looking at the row as from the quotient and from the column from the remainder. So that's what I'm doing. That's the RNC, and I am putting this inside the grid. I'm putting this in the letters frame, and this grid hence works on the letters frame, and that's a very important point. Every grid works for that specific frame, right? So when I run this now, when I run this now, you notice we get these letters forming quite nicely. I mean, this looks pretty cool. Now we can adjust this a little bit. We can change the paddings on on these letters, on these labels as well as these. Those things can be done. But the important point is that the grid has worked independently between the letters frame and the let's say the game frame, and these labels have all been placed on the letters frame. Now remember, our task is not done yet. This is just a step one. In fact, having done this, we will need to now create a mechanism to track which letters have been guessed. For that purpose, we are going to use a couple of lists. So I'm going to create here two lists. I just go and say, well, letter, let's say labels. So I'm going to keep this empty to start with, and then I have one more list which says, which is like a boolean. So letters, let's say done. Uh, Equals to false. So in the beginning, of course, nothing is done, not tk dot false. It's actually just false. Okay, so I have to be careful. False, and times 26 because there are 26 letters. So you could also use len of letters, right? Now, letter labels is this list that will contain all these labels. The way I will do this is that I will go and append. As these letters are being formed, I'll just go and say, well, letter labels dot append the label. Now, this is very interesting to think about because now we are creating a list which contains tkinter widgets. Now, lists are very versatile. We have seen lists, turtles inside a list. In fact, we will use this idea also in a later project, the Minesweeper project, where we'll make a list of lists which will contain turtle widgets, and then a game will proceed. The game will proceed basis that, right? Now, remember, this alone will just create the list. I must keep updating this list as the game proceeds. So basically, whenever I guess a word, right? Whenever I guess a word, I find that, look, this letter has been guessed. Now, whether it's, there in the letter, there in the word, not there in the word, I must still update my letters done. So I will just go and let's say make my letter. It's actually letters. I think it's letters done. Yeah, letters done. Letters dot index guessed word kk is true. Now, what does this mean? Remember, if I have, for example, a word being guessed as music, I am going through it letter by letter. So I'm just trying to find out, okay, look, where is this alphabet inside this string called letters? Wherever it is, on that position, I'm going to make my letters done equals to true. Now, this is exactly the same as what we have done, for example, when we put the Caesar cipher, right? Same idea. So this will keep track of my letters done list. Now remember, we must update these labels. We'll do this with a function, but we will do this only in the situation where the game is still going on. So I am going to update letters. I'm going to now write this function called update letters. So this is going to be a new function. So I just go and say, well, def, let's say update letters. So all I do is that I just go and say for kk in range, let's say 26. We just look at if letters done kk is equal to true. So this letter has been done, has been guessed before. If this is the case, well, I will make those letter labels kk dot config, config, say bg equals to, so we'll make it, let's say white, and likewise letter labels config, say fg equals to green. Now this is just a choice. You can do it differently, but the important point is that we are going through every time a letter is guessed. I just go through the entire list, and update these labels, right? So it's, the moment I click the guess button, basically all of this will happen. The word will be picked up from the text box. We'll update the labels, but all those 5 letters will be converted into the green color, sorry, white and green color. Next, when I guess the next word, well, previous ones are already converted, but nonetheless, we'll do it again, and the new word will then be accommodated, right? Now, when we run this piece of code, let's say I try my regular candidates party. You notice PARTY. It tells me, look, none of them were there, but nonetheless, you've used them. Let's say I try music. Uh, so if I try music, well, I is there, but it's kind of telling me now which way to guess, right? So let's say I try phone. Um, Once again, I have used these letters, and I know I and O are part of my word. I've not tried B, I've not tried F, G, J, K, L, Q, and so on, right? So it's like limited choices. Maybe I can try using some of those letters. I can try B, O, I, L, S. Let's see if that helps. Well, turns out O, I, L are there, but I have now used. So basically, I'm left with very few letters, right? So probably I could try. Well, I know it's not foils, so I probably not try that. But you get the idea, no? You can make much more, and let's say informed guesses now that you know which letters have been used, and that's being displayed to you. I hope you found this interesting, very very interesting. The way the frames are being used, and then subsequently the way the logic flows. Um, uh, Happy to discuss in case you have questions or you have more thoughts on this, as always. But the broad philosophy is clear. We build an activity and then we think of how we can enhance it, because that way we learn programming in a fun way. And that's what we do at YByte. Look at our website www.ybyte.in, because we learn Python programming through such fun activities. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.